You know, I feel like my inner desire would be just like Jenkin Pogg's, a big bowl of stew. Hello interwebs, and welcome to my latest review of the newest episode of Star Trek Prodigy, episode 3 or 4, depending on how you're counting it, Dreamcatcher. As per usual, I'm going to do my spoiler-free thoughts up front, because I'm cool like that, and then we're going to get into the spoilerific stuff in just a little bit. So, spoiler-free thoughts, I liked this episode quite a decent amount, but I'm realizing now, as I'm watching this show, that I might be having the same issue that I had with these creators' other show, Troll Hunters, over on Netflix, that I also ended up liking quite a bit. And I feel like this issue might be a problem that all of you may be having out there too, and hopefully it'll be just for a little bit, because the problem that I had with Troll Hunters was the first season, like the first half of the first season of that show, I was not loving that series because a lot of the time was spent laying groundwork for the world and the fantasy setting that as an aficionado of fantasy settings, I really already kind of knew the basic setup and rules of that type of world. Maybe not the specific rules of the Troll Hunter world, but that type of world. And so I found the series to be kind of like, okay. But as the series went along and then it started getting its own flavor and really digging into its own mythos and characters and really fleshing things out more, I ended up thinking Troll Hunters was a truly fantastic series. And right now I'm actually watching 3 Below, which is the sequel sister series to Troll Hunters, and I'm getting into that universe. So I'm really liking all of them. So I really have invested in those Tales of Arcadia shows that were on Netflix by these same creators. But I'm realizing here with Star Trek Prodigy that a lot of this episode, especially towards the beginning, was taking time spent to explain some of the basics of the Star Trek universe. Like we got explanations of tricorders, phasers, Class M planets, the sort of ethos of Starfleet to go out and explore planets. And I'm sort of aware that all of that is not for me. It is for new kids coming into the series who have no touchstones with Star Trek. And even more so than fantasy, which fantasy can have its own rules within its own genre. Like there's some touchstones that Troll Hunter was getting into, but at least it had its own unique flavor. But Star Trek is like so specific, and I've been so embroiled in it for so long that a lot of these things feel a little bit redundant, and I'm trying to get into it with the eyes of like a fresh-eyed kid getting to like learn all these things and it making a lot of sense to a kid. And like this feels like a good introduction for kids, but for me, I'm sort of like, I like this, I get what you're doing here, but like get to the fun stuff. I want to see all the cool explory stuff. And even the like storyline going on here was fairly standard for a Star Trek show, and what set it apart was the specific character stuff that we were delving into. And this episode was very much more about fleshing out the needs and desires of our characters and starting to flesh out a little bit more of their dynamics on the series. And that stuff I really, really liked. And I feel like once we get past like the first half of this season, so the next like 2 or 3 episodes hopefully, and we get past like the introductions to the basics of Starfleet, I'm going to be much more invested in this show. Not that I dislike this episode by any means. It's not bad at all, but it's very clear that like half of the stuff going on in this episode is not for me, and the stuff that is for me I am really, really liking. But overall, I'm definitely just realizing, I mean, it is a kid show, that's the intention, so they're not doing anything wrong. I think that just from my perspective is the only perspective that I can give you on this review, and as someone, I'm liking the show, but I'm realizing that it's just going to take me a little bit more time to warm up to this show than something like Lower Decks, where I like almost immediately clicked with that series, because I think I will end up liking the show quite a bit. And I think this episode just showcased that more than even the other 2 episodes, because at least the other 2 episodes of this show so far very much were like building out Prodigy's own unique world, like with the Diviner and stuff like this, where this episode is very much more like, here's some Starfleet stuff that you need to know. All that being said, the rest of the stuff, like I alluded to, I really enjoyed. Like the character, like discussions and delving into here were a lot of fun, and I liked seeing those things. It wasn't like super in-depthful, but it was enough to be like, okay, I see what they're doing here. They're fleshing out who these characters are. There's a couple of odd choices here and there that I wasn't a big fan of in terms of when they just chose to depict certain things. But overall, I think like giving us the inner core desires of our characters at this point, like what they're hoping for and yearning for, I think is a good place to like set this episode and really place that within the series. So it's laying a lot of groundwork in this episode. But those are my spoiler-free thoughts on this episode. I liked it, didn't love it, but of course the stuff that I liked was stuff that I thought was really decently done, and the stuff that I didn't really like, well, it wasn't really for me to begin with. So that's not the episode's fault. In fact, it's to the episode's benefit. It's doing what it's supposed to do. But let's get into spoilers right after this quick ad break. It's time to quick talk about my sponsor for the rest of my Star Trek reviews this year, The Geek Fight. The Geek Fight is a non-profit online store that fights for a diverse future, and they have two goals. Number one, create an easy way to learn about human rights thanks to their Lightbrary, a digital library with light content. Over there you can find the stories of people fighting for human rights like the amazing Marsha P. Johnson, learn about how we can abolish and rethink policing, and find movies that represent disabilities beyond stereotypes, and even more. And number two, they hope to raise money for social causes. They have t-shirts, pillows, prints, etc. with human rights and geek designs, combining the best of both worlds. For example, I have this adorable bag which has this wonderful little trans badger on it. It's absolutely adorable, and all the money for things like this go to organizations like the Human Rights Campaign, which is an LGBTQ organization fighting for LGBTQ rights. So please go check out the Geek Fight. It's a wonderful place. You get to get yourself cool knowledge and cool nerdy stuff, and also support really cool stuff doing really great work. So please go check out the Geek Fight, and if you want 15% off all of your orders, use the promo code Jessie at checkout to get yourself that 15% off that I just mentioned. So thank you so much to the Geek Fight, and let's get back to the review. Alright, now we're back to spoilers. Let's get into this. I really loved the opening of this episode with Dahl giving a captain's log. Again, establishing some Star Trekian tropes, but I like that Dahl's sort of like dismissive of it and is like, alright, this is weird, and like setting up a lot of the stuff that Janeway's been teaching them, like helping them get acquainted with the ship, kind of pushing us forward a little bit in some of those departments. Like they're acquainted a little bit more with the ship, but not so much. I thought that was really fun. But then we get the ship coming across an uninhabited system called the Hirogen system, which, by the way, we're in the Delta Quadrant, and the Hirogen are the warrior race that we saw back in Star Trek Voyager that would like just murdering stuff. They wore Nazi uniforms that one time, so I'm like sitting here like, are we gonna get the like murder aliens in this Prodigy show this quickly? Because it would make sense. So it seems weird that they would have the Hirogen system in a Star Trek Voyager episode. Maybe there's some part of lore about the Hirogens that I forget, like maybe they abandoned their initial system. I forgot if that's the case, but if not, that feels weird that they're mentioning the Hirogen in the Delta Quadrant and not have it actually be the Hirogen from Voyager. So maybe some wires got crossed there. They also get Janeway teaching them about Class M planets, which, again, us Starfleet nerds know that Class M planets are inhabitable planets, but I like Dahl's sort of like, I like Class A planets, kind of feeding into his arrogance. And kind of off of that, too, I know a lot of people after last episode really disliked Dahl from last episode because of a lot of his arrogance. I kind of bought it because I was really buying into this, like, his distrust of Starfleet and kind of, like, wanting to go and do his own thing for the first time in his life. So I wasn't as frustrated with him. I was a little bit more frustrated with him this episode, but then they kind of turned it around at the end for me with his actions toward the end of this episode. But feeding into his arrogance here, we get this nice little bit where he says, of course not, we don't want to go to this planet because the Diviner's going to come and get us, which again makes sense. He's a bit of an asshole when he comes and says it, though how he says it, but he does, it is totally true. But I get him with Janeway sort of saying, well, I'll call Starfleet if you don't want to go down there, and him sort of being like, oh, we don't need to get Starfleet involved. Again, his distrust of Starfleet that I find very true to his character and makes sense to me as I spoke about last episode. But then we get the crew landing on this very Pandora-esque planet, and I love Zero, like, totally botching the landing. And it's like, I got it. Also, apparently the Protostar can land just like the Voyager before it, so I like that sort of like subtle callback to Star Trek Voyager and the Intrepid-class starships. Also, we get to learn a little bit about, like, tricorders, phasers, all that stuff, and we get to see a new type of ground vehicle. Sadly, it's not the Argo from Star Trek Nemesis, but it's called the Runaway, I believe it's what it was called. I liked it, so, like, very gravelly, very all-terrain sort of vehicle rather than the Argo from Nemesis. And then we also get the reiteration that hologram Janeway can't leave the ship, so that at least tells me that if my theory about time travel is true, it can't have been from, I believe, the 27th century, which is where the Doctor got his holographic emitter. So it may be from the future, but not that far in the future. So interesting note there. I also like Janeway saying that Murph will keep me company, which was absolutely adorable. Then we have our crew going off on the planet, and I love Zero's just like zeroing in on just like figuring things out. It's like, there's a lot of fauna here, but there's no nutrients in the soil. That's kind of interesting, which is actually very Star Trekian in nature if you think about it. Going back to the original series, there are many original series episodes where they notice like, there's no bugs on this planet, and yet there's a lot of fauna. That's weird. That's like a very Star Trekian trope, and I like that quite a bit. It's like, again, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I like the subtle differences there. But obviously we get some creepy fauna that all of our characters go off in their separate ways, and they start to get like visions of things that they desire, which this fauna is showing them to keep them on the planet. Now again, we get Dahl being a little bit of a jerk here, where he just rushes off saying, I'm gonna go do stuff on my own, and Rock Talk, who is easily my favorite character so far, being like, I thought we were gonna gonna hang out together, and then just goes off on her own, which is very, very sad. And again, Rock Talk, easily gonna be my favorite character so far, followed probably by Gwen, to be honest with you. But we get our characters split off in different directions. Jenkum Pog, of course, just wants a nice bowl of porridge, which I was just like, no, that's straight out of a fairy tale, Jenkum. No, don't eat it. It's bad. Then we get Zero also finding the engine, which I liked this idea that Zero is very fascinated by the engine of the ship, because they're very clearly like the science-oriented one, and so wants to figure out the mystery of what this engine is. So I thought that was very, very cool. Rock Talk, of course, just wants to find cute, adorable little friend aliens, which just warmed my heart and just makes me sad when she gets rescued and they just disappear, and she's like, oh, I miss them, and they're gone. That was very, very cute. And then we also get Doll coming across his parents, who he doesn't recognize their faces, can't see them, and so that sort of speaks to the fact that like he wants to know more about his parents. So I liked like learning a little bit about all these different characters and their sort of pathos going into the rest of the series at this moment. I think is a good place to sort of see like these are the desires and mysteries behind our characters, and so I thought this was a good place for that. And Jenkum Pog just wants porridge. He's a simple man, has simple needs. We also get Gwen trying to leave the ship, and we got a little bit of a hint that Murph might be smarter than he lets on, which I think a lot of people might be getting. Like, Murph appears like a dumb little pet sort of thing, but I think Murph might actually have some intelligence, because why would you hire Deep Bradley Baker just to do noises? Deep Bradley Baker being the voice actor for Murph, who is a very talented voice actor, which he can do these voices. It's very cute, but I have a feeling when I see Murph talking at some point in this series, and Murph is a little bit more intelligent than he lets on. But Gwen has a little psychic connection to her liquid sword, which I thought was cool. She manages to escape, reprograms Hollow Janeway. She starts to realize that she's been training her whole life to take over the ship, that her father was only teaching her to take care of the ship. But then as she tries to leave, I should mention Hollow Janeway says something along the lines of, like, I'm beginning to think you weren't put in there for the flu, which goes back to this other thing. A lot of people in the comments last episode said that, like, people said, oh, Janeway totally knows that they aren't really cadets. But then, like, lines like that, where she said, I think that you weren't put in there for the flu, makes me think, like, but does she? I don't know. And so this like level of like awareness that Janeway has, like, is she aware of them not being cadets? And there are some wink nudges to assume that in this episode, like the way she's delivered some lines. But then again, there's like this flu line that has me think maybe she doesn't. So I'm not entirely sure on all those fronts. But then we get also Hollow Janeway trying to contact Doll, who arrogantly didn't pay attention to anything. I know that'll probably frustrate a bunch of you out there. It frustrated me a little bit too. But what saved it for me was when he realized that the hologram Janeway couldn't leave the ship, so therefore the fauna was just showing him what he wanted. And so he has to escape the creepy fauna Janeway, which was absolutely terrifying, by the way. And then he goes through and saves every single one of his crewmates. And that's what sort of brought his arrogance around. Last episode, his arrogance just got them into trouble and didn't really do anything else but that. Whereas this episode, yeah, he was kind of foolhardy and full of himself at certain points, and that didn't really get them into trouble. In fact, if they followed his advice at the beginning of the episode, they wouldn't have been in any trouble at all. So I like that his arrogance, while rude, didn't get them into trouble, and he was the first person to realize what was wrong and start rescuing everybody. So I think his arrogance, while still grating, I think probably to some, worked better for me in this episode than it did in last episode, because it wasn't part of the direct cause of the problem, was just something that was getting in his way, which fits like sort of character flaw. But then he goes back and rescues everyone. Again, I also really like the notice that Zero had already figured everything out, but was just too enamored with everything to, like, care. It was just like, ooh, this is so interesting. And then I also like when Jenkum was rescued, it said, why was I the last one to be rescued? And then we go back to cut to Gwen, and this is one of the parts that I didn't really particularly love about this episode that I'll chalk up as an actual negative, is that we do get a scene with her seeing the Diviner, which does establish that the Diviner does not love her, and all she wants is a nice hug from, like, her father figure, which is, again, a good character trait for her. And I think that fits where her arc is going to be going throughout the series, because clearly she's going to become friends with these characters. She might betray them at one point, but eventually she'll become friends with them again. And she's going to do that because her father never really cared for her, and she's going to realize that. So that's my guess with how her arc is going to play out. Bit standard, but I can see it. What I have a negative here for is that we just got to see the full face of the Diviner here, which this is the first time, like, we've seen his face, and we've seen him, like, in shadow and this creepy vibe. So to, like, see him just as this, like fauna vision version of himself and just get to see all of him, I think removes some of the creepiness and mystery of him. And I know this wasn't actually him, but I would have rathered him be much more menacing and shadowed in darkness for at least a little bit longer, just to establish the, like, terror and menace of him. To see him like this, I think diminishes him a little bit in my mind, and I was a little bit upset, or not upset, bothered by that. But again, I understand why they did it, to establish where Gwen's arc is going to be going. So you have to kind of weigh those two things. But it was something that I was like, I wasn't a big fan of that. But then Gwen has to escape the ship at the very last minute as the fauna sort of takes over it, and she rescues Murph, which was adorable, and I appreciate it, and she leaves in the shuttle that they had made last episode, which I like that continuity there, and then the ship gets tossed away as the crew gets back to the ship and realizes that they are stuck on this planet, with the Diviner possibly coming because Gwen has already contacted him. So, an interesting to be continued on for next week, which I like to see. So next week, we're going to be dealing with the fallout of this episode, but what's going to be interesting is, for those of you who don't know, and I might as well tell you up front in case you hadn't heard the news, they announced that Star Trek Prodigy was renewed for a Season 2. So Season 1 is going to be 20 episodes, which is awesome, and then we're going to get Season 2 after that at some point, probably in 2023 or something along those lines. However, there is going to be like a quarter season finale next week. So next week already, surprisingly, is very, very quick. We're going to have a big break between episodes because we're going to get one episode next week, and then we're not going to get any new episodes of Prodigy until January. Probably because they're going to be focusing on Discovery starting next week, have all of Discovery come out, and then Prodigy will start to overlap and sort of fill in the gaps until probably Star Trek Picard after it. So Prodigy feels like it's going to be a fill in the gaps type show, and also kind of fits the scheduling of kid shows. Kid shows are very eclectic across the board with scheduling, like any fan of like basically any fan of like since Korra or like any other kid show on any network knows, these kid show networks just don't care and will schedule things willy-nilly. So a little bit weird, a little bit disappointing on the scheduling front there, just when the show is building momentum. But at the very least, we still will have more Star Trek because next week starts Star Trek Discovery. So look out for my Prodigy review next week, but also Star Trek Discovery starts next week as well. But those reviews will be going up on my main channel, not here on the side channel. So subscribe here for my reviews of Doctor Who, Prodigy, and Hawkeye coming up in just a little bit, but over on my main channel for my Star Trek Discovery reviews as well as my other video essay stuff. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to next week's Prodigy, even though it will be the or like quarter season finale, I guess. But until then, I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.